What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I want to discuss what empathetic men need to understand in order to protect themselves from judgment or judgmental people. Before we dive too deep into that though, if you enjoy the content that I share, if you like today's video and if you take anything from it, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and a comment in the video, and please subscribe for more content like this. With that stuff out of the way, let's dive into this. And let's start this conversation by stating this. The most fundamental thing that you need to understand in order to protect yourself from judgment or judgmental people is boundaries. Boundaries. Now, boundaries are essentially lines or limits that we place up, that we use to protect ourselves. Right? They're psychological and energetic lines. So they're not necessarily visible. Now you can communicate those to people, but even still, they're not necessarily visible. So there's no physical form to these things. But with that said, they very much resemble, the idea resembles the boundaries or the lines that distinguish a country from another. That line down at the south border of the United States that distinguishes the difference between Mexico and the US. And the same thing in the north between the US and Canada, right? So these boundaries help us separate ourselves from the other person, right? And these boundaries will define what behaviors that we will accept and the behaviors that we won't accept. Now, the one thing I really want to emphasize before we dive too much deeper into the idea of boundaries is there are both going to be internal and external boundaries. Now, yes, you're going to need to communicate boundaries and things to people, and we're going to get to that. But most of the work is establishing these boundaries for and with yourself and remaining grounded and rooted in them. Your internal boundaries are the most important thing that we're going to talk about here today. Okay, your internal boundaries, the boundaries that you have for and with yourself. Okay, so now with that out of the way, let's dive a little bit deeper into boundaries. And so the question becomes, well, okay, I want to use these boundaries to protect myself from judgmental people or judgmental behaviors, right? So when it comes to boundaries, the first thing is always we have to determine what need we're looking to fulfill. In this particular case, we're talking about judgment. We're talking about protecting ourselves from judgment. Okay, so we know what need we need to fulfill. We want to protect ourselves from judgment, right? Because judgmental people are draining. You come home from work after everyone's being judgmental towards you or judging each other, and you just feel wiped out and drained because it's like, Jesus, fuck. You know, it's like, do I really have to deal with it? Whatever it is for you, right? It's draining as fuck, right? So we know what the needs that we're looking to fulfill. Now we need to establish the lines that we're going to create for ourselves. Establish the boundaries you're going to create for yourself, right? If you don't want to deal with people judging you all the time, like Richard or Jeff at work, or they're calling you an asshole all the time, you don't want to deal with that type of behavior. You have to first establish that. Establish the behaviors that you will no longer tolerate. Okay, and this could be specific ones with specific people, and then zoom out on that a little bit more, and then get more broad with it and recognize the type of behavior, because it could carry into new situations. Right? So if you don't want to be called an asshole, simply put, Jeff won't call me an asshole anymore. I won't tolerate that, and then I won't tolerate being called names anymore, to zoom out and think broader, bigger picture type of thing. Okay, so now we know what need we're looking to fulfill. We know what lines we've created. Now comes practicing and honoring them. And this is where I'm going to come back to the internal boundaries. If you don't want to be called an asshole, if you don't want to be called names anymore, it starts with you. It starts with you. When Jeff or Richard at work call you an asshole or call you some other type of name, because at first you might communicate it to them, right? And they might honor it for like a day. And then the next day, maybe they'll dumb it down a little bit. And instead of calling you an asshole, they'll just call you like a turd or something. But the bigger picture of it all is you don't want to be called names anymore, right? And so when we bring it back to ourselves is, how are you going to handle those situations when they arise? Because people are going to push the limitations of your boundaries. People will push the limitations of your boundaries. So you have to constantly, consistently practice this. And when Richard or Jeff at work push those limitations of your boundaries, then you bring it back and you either re-communicate it to them or you fucking ignore them or something in between there, because it doesn't have to be those two extremes, right? You deter the conversation a different way. You're really short with them. And there's a whole different avenue, a whole different video in and of itself on how to navigate those conversations, but it has to come back to you and how you're going to handle the situations, because make no mistake about it, my friends, when you establish those boundaries, the universe will always test you, and that will come in the form of your coworkers pushing the limitations, or your partner, because it's the same thing's gonna happen in a relationship. Your partner is gonna push the limitations of your boundaries, because it's not their responsibility to make sure that you are upholding your boundaries. It's yours. So you have to take radical responsibility for your own boundaries once you establish them. And when people push them, when they start poking the line, they poking the bear, you remain grounded and rooted in your boundaries. And now that means also having compassion for yourself, because this is a new habit you're forming. This is a new internal habit you're forming, and you're gonna slip back. There's gonna be a balancing act to this all. You may have gone the last 10 years of your life without upholding your own boundaries. And so when you start to kind of push that a little bit, it's gonna feel uncomfortable. It's not gonna feel right, right? That's a good thing. It's a good thing. So now, the thing I want to bring up next is communicating your boundaries. Again, this is an inside-out job. This is an inside-out job. Okay, when you know what your boundaries are, you can absolutely communicate to those people. You can absolutely do that. And I want to encourage you to look inward at this always. This is always an inside-out job, because it is, again, not somebody else's responsibility to uphold your boundaries. It is your responsibility. And the reason I say this is because I want to encourage you to look inward. If people aren't honoring your boundaries, what am I doing that is preventing people from seeing my boundaries? Now, the thing with this is, and here's where it's going to get confusing, is when you start to recognize that the people in your life that are closest to you are the most judgmental, and you have to establish boundaries with them. You have to, because this might mean mom and dad and auntie and uncle and grandmom and grandpa, okay? Some of these people, again, you can communicate these things to them, but some of these people won't be able to go to that depth with you. If you're doing this work, if you're doing the work of healing emotionally, if you're doing the work of establishing boundaries for yourself to protect yourself mentally and emotionally and energetically, and you want to communicate that to people, I'm here to encourage you to do that, because it is phenomenal practice. And then you have to uphold your own boundaries, because grandmom grew up in a different time and under different circumstances, and the likelihood that she's going to go to this depth of emotional intelligence with you is not impossible, but it's not always likely. And so if grandmom's not going to do that, you can't keep communicating it to her, or let me rephrase it, you can continue to communicate it to her. And then what happens when she doesn't respect your boundaries? When she doesn't honor your boundaries? You have to draw a line in the sand. Your actions have to be a reflection of the boundaries you've established for and with yourself. That's why I'm saying there are internal and external ones. Like, you tell grandma, I'm not dealing with this anymore. She's going to disrespect your boundaries. What are you going to do next? And this is where the challenging part comes in, right? So you start cutting her off. You stop spending as much time with grandma. You stop spending as much time with mom and dad, right? And this isn't because you don't love them. This isn't because of this, that, the other thing. This isn't because you don't care. This is because you are honoring and respecting your own boundaries. Again, I want to encourage you to communicate them if you really feel called, like you need to do it, okay? Because the truth of the matter is, some of us need to do it. And the deeper truth of it all is that people can only meet you as deeply as they're willing to meet themselves. And if they're not doing this work, then again, you can continue to communicate that to your boundaries to them, to get good practice in, because it's the truth, like, it is good practice. But if you're expecting them to uphold your boundaries, that's where the challenge really comes in, because you're going to find yourself disappointed and disappointed and disappointed. And that goes into a whole different topic another day that we'll get into another day, of like enmeshment and all kinds of stuff down that road. Okay, so I want to encourage you to communicate your boundaries to people, and then when they don't uphold them, bring it back to yourself. Bring it back to your internal boundaries. Am I upholding my boundaries? Because if you don't uphold your boundaries, nobody else will. If you don't remain firmly rooted and grounded in your boundaries around judgment, with Richard and Jeff at work when they start calling you names again, then they're going to find that that behavior is acceptable, and then will continue to call you names. And listen, sometimes anger or aggression can be useful, especially when you continue to resist the fact that your boundaries are important, your needs are important. You must uphold and honor and respect your own boundaries and needs. Okay, I probably repeated myself like 15 times there because I cannot emphasize that enough, y'all. There's all this talk out in the world these days of boundaries and stuff, and I love it. I'm so thankful and grateful that this information is becoming more mainstream. And also, this is an inside-out job, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Okay, so now let's dive a little bit deeper into this and how it applies to judgment. Because if you continue to attract judgmental people, judgmental behaviors from people, then you, again, have to look inward at this. Inside-out job. This is an inside-out job. This is an inside-out game. The law of attraction. You attract what you are. Your vibe attracts your tribe, right? And so if you keep attracting those people, because let me take a step back and say this. Again, overly communicating to people is trying to get, in an attempt to try to get them to change, to make it easier for you to uphold your boundaries. If you're doing something like that, then you're always going to find yourself hitting your head against a brick wall, because you're trying to change them to fulfill your needs instead of fulfilling your needs by doing the work yourself. You can't control them. If they really love you, they might start to shift their behaviors in some ways, but at the same time, they are who they are. And you have to do what's best for you. Now, again, the reason I share this is because this is an inside-out game. And if you keep attracting judgmental people judging you, judgmental behaviors, then there is some part of you, whether you're conscious of it or not, there is some part of you that is accepting of judgment and judgmental behavior and judgmental people. There's some part of you that is attracting that to you. And this is where we start to dive into the deeper layers of healing. This is where we start to dive into the deeper layers of your individuality and the things that you're here to heal, to transcend your own egoic structures and align with your soul. Right? So just to kind of rattle some of these off really fast. And again, this is where we start to really dive into it. So I can't, this is really individual. And this is where we'd have to dive into it one-on-one together. And if you're interested in that kind of thing, I'll mention something at the end of the video. But if you're recognizing, so you're at a space now where it's like, okay, you know what, you're right, dude, you're totally right. Like I'm attracting people because there's some part of me that's accepting judgment. What is it that I need to recognize within myself and heal within myself in order to stop attracting these type of people and behaviors? And so let's dive into these, okay? If you're still with me, then you're ready to go a little bit deeper, and let's dive into these. So the first thing I want to talk about is your stories. Your stories. What's the story you're telling yourself about yourself? What's the story you're telling yourself about yourself? We're talking about this on like a mental level. We're all telling a story about ourselves day in and day out. Day in and day out. There's some type of archetypal story that you are fulfilling within your own psyche. And if you've never dove into archetypal psychology, it's really rooted in Carl Jung's work. I highly recommend you look into that. There's a great book, I mentioned it in a few videos before, called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Douglas Gillette and Robert Moore, I believe, that really talks about this in the context of the masculine archetypes that we all tend to embody in big ways and small ways. But there's some type of story that you are fulfilling every single day, some archetype that you have embodied as who you think you are. And that story is on a rerun, on a loop inside of your mind, inside of your psyche. And that comes with all these different types of patterns, behaviors, emotional patterns and behaviors. Okay, so what's the story you're telling yourself about yourself? What's the narrative playing in your mind? And you really start to dive into that. I used to have a story that like, I'm a loser. And I was always worried about being a loser. So my mind would constantly try to find all the things that would make me a loser and try to fix them. All the things that were broken about me. And so my mind was so fixated on what's wrong with Tyler and how can we fix him? And that was a story that was playing on a rerun, on a loop in my mind for like 28 years until I brought a tremendous amount of awareness to it. And what I mean by that is once you start to recognize the story in big ways and small ways, in minor thoughts that randomly pop up out of nowhere in the middle of the day, or the big overarching narrative that you're playing in your mind, in big ways and small ways, when you start to notice that you just sit in unwavering presence with the story and you let it play out and let it play out in the way you listen to it, you let the things unfold in your life, and you are the witness to it all. You take the seat of witness consciousness and you witness what's happening within your human vessel, within your humanness, within the story of who you are, whoever Tyler is, right? For my own specific persons. Okay, so that's the first one. What's your story? Okay. Maybe your story is, I don't want to be judged. And so your mind is so fixated on not being judged that it finds all the reasons, it finds all the people that judge you to keep the story alive that I don't want to be judged. Okay, so there's a mental level and there's an emotional aspect to this, right? We all have emotional patterns. I mean, emotions have a chemical response in the body. They have a chemical response in the body. Like fear can be related to cortisol, the stress hormone. It has a very specific relationship within the body and what happens with cortisol. Right? So your relationship with fear can be related to your relationship with cortisol. Just as an example, but you have emotional patterns, and emotional patterns can be addicting. You're addicted to feeling certain ways. Maybe you're addicted to feeling judged. I'm going to say that one more time. I'm going to say this for myself. Maybe you're addicted to feeling judged. I'm saying this for myself because I was addicted to feeling judged by people. So much so that I would find all the reasons why people were judging me. And I would attract all the people that would have judgments towards me. And I created all these stories around it because I had an addiction to an emotional pattern of feeling judged. And so there could be an emotional pattern embedded within your nervous system. And just like any addiction, because the thing with addiction, y'all, real quick, is that like cocaine in and of itself is not addicting. It is the chemical rush that ensues within the body and the extent of it, especially with something like cocaine, that is addicting. Your emotional patterns are the same way. You have an addiction, your body has an addiction to a specific feeling, a specific sensation, a specific emotional pattern. And so you keep attracting that into your life. And when we start to heal the stories, we start to heal the patterns. And sometimes they'll go hand in hand, y'all. A lot of the time they'll go hand in hand. When we start to heal these, we stop attracting those people in our lives. We stop attracting those people in our lives. We stop attracting those behaviors in our lives. The last thing I want to mention really fast about one of the reasons as to why you could be attracting judgmental people or judgmental behaviors in your life is because you're judging yourself. Because you're judging yourself. And what I mean is, right now I'm just filming this video. My mind could be judging me, right? I am the presence that is experiencing the filming of this video right now. My mind is an entity that operates outside of the present moment. right? You can visualize the future and then you can relive the past. And you do that through the mind, through the memory, right? Through the imagination, we visualize the future. Through the memory, we remember the past, right? So the mind, in a sense, operates outside of the scope of the present moment. And so the mind can pull up memories from the past and judge me for messing up, for stuttering, because I used to stutter a lot when I first started filming videos. And my mind used to stop me in the middle. I would, in the middle of a video, I would just get like a writer's block, but in reference for filming a video. The similar idea. I couldn't keep going. Like I would freeze because I would feel judged, but there's nobody around to judge me. My mind was literally judging the actions I was performing in that very moment. And I can even hear it right now, kind of doing the same thing. So that part of your psyche is judging the present version of you. Whether it's judging you because of a standard you have for yourself in the future, or because of a memory of the past, or because of subconscious programming from your past that was implanted in the subconscious parts of your mind from your parents, from your grandparents, from your teachers, whomever it was. Because sometimes the judgmental patterns of ourselves don't come from ourselves, they come from subconscious programming. And so if that's what you're experiencing, again, there's layers to this, and there's a lot more complexity that goes into healing these specific things. And if you're interested in exploring working with me as your mentor, there will be a link down below that you can, or there will be something down below to signify what to do for that. But with that stuff out of the way, though, there's a lot of complexity that can go into healing specific things. And in order for me to be able to help you individually, I would have to understand you more. Now, if you don't want to hire a mentor, if you don't want to hire a therapist or anything like that, you can absolutely heal these wounds, you can heal these patterns, you can heal these stories on your own. But it takes so much, it's a tremendous amount of awareness. It takes you going into the depths of your heart, the darkness in your soul, and sitting with all of the fears that these judgments are covering up. Because what is judgment? A judgment is an opinion, and opinions are formed by the mind. You're not your mind. You are not your mind. Your mind is your brain in action. Your brain is a tool for you to use while you're a human being. Right? You're not all of the opinions and thoughts and judgments that you have. You are the space that they're showing up in. Right? And so if you're willing to, and you claim that, you can go to the depths, the darkness inside of you, and heal those on your own. And if you choose to do that, it will suck, it will not feel comfortable, it will be very unpleasant. This is the path that I chose. And it'll feel like you're dying all the time. And you won't like physically be dying because clearly I'm still here, but it'll feel extremely uncomfortable. It'll feel like someone's ripping pieces of you apart, off of you all the time. And if you're willing to go there, if you're willing to do that work, I want to encourage you to do it. And if you do it, you will meet a part of yourself that will guide you through it. It'll be like you'll be feeling all of the feels, you'll be feeling all the negativity, and that part of you will just be like, that judgment isn't yours. Just let it be there. There'll just be a whisper in your mind. It'll come and go. It's not going to stay there and remind you all the time. It's going to be a whisper to remind you that you're on the right path. If you're willing to do that, you'll hear the whispers. You'll see the subtle signs, and you'll sit in the fire with that negativity, with the judgment, because you absolutely can do it. And there are people out there, there are healers, there are therapists, there are mentors like myself who are here to guide you and facilitate that process for you, that it lightens the load, I'll put it that way. So with that all out of the way, y'all, I hope this video has helped you protect your own energy from judgment and judgmental people. If you guys took anything from this video, again, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like, a comment, and please subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And if you're interested in working with me one-on-one as your mentor to help guide and facilitate you on your journey of healing and holistic wellness, then there will be something down below in the description to tell you what to do next. All right, y'all. Peace out.